The courtroom smelled of old paper, dust, and quiet judgment. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of people who believed this was just another small case, another poor man about to be crushed by a system that rarely paused to listen. At the center stood a single father in worn clothes, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes steady but tired, holding a thin folder that looked far too small to defend his entire life. When the judge glanced at him and laughed softly under his breath, the sound echoed louder than the gavel ever could. No one in that room knew that within minutes, everything they believed about power, justice, and this broken man would be turned upside down. If you believe that kindness still matters, that second chances can change lives, and that the truth always finds a way to the surface, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us why humanity still matters. The man's name was Daniel Hart. He was 38 years old, a widower, and the sole caregiver of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. His life had collapsed 3 years earlier when his wife died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition, leaving him not only heartbroken but drowning in hospital bills, funeral costs, and a world that suddenly felt cruel and indifferent. Daniel had once been an accomplished legal scholar, though no one in that courtroom would have guessed it. After his wife's death, he left everything behind to raise Lily, taking night shifts as a warehouse worker and daytime work fixing appliances just to keep food on the table. Sleep became a luxury. Pride became irrelevant. Survival was everything. The case that brought him to court that day was painfully ordinary. A property dispute. A powerful development company claimed Daniel had forged documents to delay eviction from the small house he rented, the only home Lily remembered. The company's lawyers arrived in tailored suits, carrying stacks of files and confidence sharpened by years of winning cases against people like him. Daniel arrived alone, carrying that thin folder and the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. The judge assigned to the case had a reputation. Sharp tongue, quick rulings, little patience for stories soaked in poverty. As Daniel stood there explaining his situation in measured, respectful terms, the judge barely looked up. When Daniel mentioned that he had filed motions himself due to not being able to afford legal representation, a brief laugh escaped the bench. It wasn't loud, but it was dismissive, and it cut through Daniel deeper than outright insults ever could. The courtroom audience noticed. A few shook their heads. Some smirked. This was how these stories usually ended. Daniel felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in his chest, but he steadied himself. He thought of Lily waiting, school, her backpack slightly torn, her shoes always a size too small because he delayed buying new ones. He thought of the nights he stayed awake, helping her with homework after 12-hour shifts, promising her silently that he would never let the world break her the way it tried to break him. He reminded himself why he was here, not for pride, not for revenge, but for justice. As the proceedings continued, the development company's lawyers spoke with polished confidence, painting Daniel as an uneducated squatter trying to exploit legal loopholes. They twisted timelines, exaggerated claims, and relied on the unspoken assumption that no one would seriously question them. The judge nodded along, visibly more engaged with their arguments than with anything Daniel had said. The outcome seemed inevitable. But something unexpected happened. When Daniel was given one final chance to speak, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't plead, he didn't beg. Instead, he calmly requested permission to submit a supplemental brief that had not yet been reviewed, explaining that it contained precedent relevant to the case and constitutional concerns regarding due process. The judge sighed, irritated, and waved dismissively, clearly viewing this as a waste of time from a man who didn't know his place. What no one realized was that Daniel had spent countless nights after Lily fell asleep studying case law again, reopening books he once knew by heart, slowly reconnecting with a part of himself he thought he had buried forever. He had not forgotten the law. He had stepped away from it. There was a difference. As Daniel presented his argument, something shifted in the room. His words were precise, his references accurate, his understanding deep. The lawyers across from him exchanged brief glances, their confidence cracking just enough to be noticeable. The judge leaned forward slightly, irritation giving way to curiosity. The laughter from earlier suddenly felt premature. Daniel spoke about legal principles not as abstract ideas, but as living promises meant to protect the vulnerable. He framed his case not as a personal grievance, but as a test of whether the law served only those who could afford it. His voice remained steady, but the emotion beneath it was undeniable. He wasn't performing. He was remembering who he was. The judge interrupted, questioning Daniel sharply, almost challengingly. Daniel answered without hesitation, citing rulings from memory, explaining interpretations with clarity that silenced the room. The judge's expression hardened, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. Then came the moment that changed everything. Daniel calmly requested that the court take judicial notice of a recent Supreme Court interpretation relevant to eviction protections and procedural fairness. He referenced internal deliberations, historical context, and intent in a way that only someone intimately familiar with the highest level of the judiciary could do. The room went still. Even the court clerk paused. The judge leaned back, studying Daniel for a long moment, the earlier amusement completely gone. Something about this man no longer fit the story he had assumed. Finally, Daniel did something no one expected. He reached into his worn folder and produced a single official document, requesting it be entered into the record. The judge took it, read it once, then again, slower this time. The color drained from his face. The document confirmed what seemed impossible. Daniel Hart was not just a struggling single father. He was, in fact, a sitting Supreme Court justice who had taken an extended, confidential sabbatical following personal tragedy. His identity had been kept private by design, approved at the highest levels, allowing him to step away without public scrutiny while retaining his position. He had chosen to live anonymously, to experience the system as it treated the powerless, not as a man protected by title and influence. The courtroom erupted into stunned silence. The laughter from earlier now felt like a stain no one could erase. The judge stood abruptly, shaken. The power dynamic that had felt so permanent minutes earlier shattered completely. This was no longer a case about eviction. It was a mirror held up to the system itself. Daniel did not gloat. He did not shame anyone. He simply stood there, eyes tired but clear, and allowed the truth to speak for itself. The case was dismissed immediately, not because of who he was, but because the law had been misused from the beginning. The development company's attorneys packed their files without a word, their arrogance replaced by quiet defeat. But the real impact of that day went far beyond one courtroom. Daniel's experience sparked internal reviews, reforms, and uncomfortable conversations across the judiciary. Policies were re-examined, training was mandated, judges were reminded that robes did not grant immunity from compassion, all because one man chose humility over privilege, truth over comfort. When Daniel returned home that evening, Lily ran into his arms, unaware of the history her father had just made. To her, he was simply Dad, the man who made grilled cheese for dinner, helped with spelling words, and kissed her forehead before bed. And that was exactly how Daniel wanted it. He returned to his role on the Supreme Court quietly, carrying with him the weight of what he had seen. He ruled differently after that, more carefully, more humanly. Every case reminded him of the courtroom where he had been laughed at, and of the millions of people who never get the chance to reveal a hidden title or powerful truth. Stories like this remind us that dignity does not come from status, and justice is not supposed to recognize wealth before humanity. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something deep inside, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in fairness, and subscribe to the channel so these stories continue to reach the people who need them. And before you go, leave a comment below telling us whether you believe the justice system can truly change when empathy leads the way. Because sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who choose to walk among us unseen, carrying not authority but understanding.